Michael Mendoza was the richest man in Madrid, but also the most desperate. His 8-year-old twins, Diego and Alejandro, fought from morning to night, turning their mansion into a battlefield. In 3 years, he had fired 12 nannies. Neither of them could handle those children who seemed to hate the whole world after their mother's death. When Carmen Ruiz, a 25-year-old employee from the poor neighborhoods of Seville, arrived, Michael thought she would last a week at most. The twins greeted her with their usual pranks, screaming, tantrums, and toys thrown all over the house. But what Carmen did that afternoon left everyone speechless. Instead of scolding them or calling the father, he sat on the floor in the midst of the chaos and began to cry. But they weren't real tears. And what happened next would forever change the lives of that broken family, proving that sometimes it takes the heart of a stranger to heal seemingly incurable wounds. The Mendoza mansion in the Salamanca neighborhood looked like a war museum after each day with the twins. Michael watched the damage from the last battle from his study window. Cushions strewn everywhere, broken toys, a shattered glass vase. Diego and Alejandro, both just turned 8, were sitting in opposite corners of the room, arms crossed and furious looks on their faces. They were identical physically, but opposite in character. And this difference had become a source of constant conflict. Diego was impulsive and creative, always on the move. Alejandro was thoughtful and methodical. He preferred books to games. Before the tragedy, they complemented each other. Now they looked like two little enemies, forced to share the same house. Michael was 42 years old and ran an empire worth 800 million euros. He could buy anything, solve any business problem, but he couldn't manage 2 children. Since Isabel had died in that car accident 3 years earlier, the twins had become uncontrollable. The pain had transformed them into small bombs ready to explode. The last nanny, Mrs. Benitez, had left that morning after the umpteenth series of pranks played by the twins. It was the 12th in 3 years. Michael was beginning to think his children were lost causes. The next day, Carmen Ruiz arrived, 25 years old, brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail, dark eyes that seemed to have seen too much for her age. He came from Poligono Sur, a difficult neighborhood in Seville, and had a history of sacrifice behind him. She had dropped out of school to work and help her family, but she possessed a natural intelligence and determination that impressed anyone who met her. Michael welcomed her into his studio, explaining the situation to her bluntly. The twins were very difficult. If he didn't feel capable, he could leave immediately. Carmen listened to him in silence. Then he simply asked to be able to meet the children. He found them in the living room engaged in their favorite sport, methodically destroying everything they could get their hands on. Diego was throwing Lego blocks against the wall, while Alejandro had opened all the books in the library, scattering them on the floor. Carmen stood in the doorway, watching them for a few minutes. He didn't say anything, he didn't scold them, he didn't call their father. He just looked at them with curiosity, as if he were studying a complex situation to be resolved. When the twins noticed her presence, they stopped their destructive activities and looked at her with that defiance in their eyes they had reserved for all previous babysitters. They expected me to start screaming, threatening them, calling for Dad. Instead, Carmen entered the living room, took off her shoes, and sat on the floor amidst the chaos. Then he did something completely unexpected. He began to cry. They weren't dramatic tears, but silent tears running down her cheeks as she slowly picked up the scattered blocks. Diego and Alejandro froze. In 3 years, no nanny had ever cried in front of them. What they didn't know was that Carmen wasn't really crying. He was acting, putting into practice a strategy he had learned growing up in a neighborhood where survival depended on the ability to read people. He had immediately understood what those children were missing. Not discipline or rules, but someone who acknowledged their pain instead of fighting it. Carmen continued to pick up the blocks in silence, letting the tears roll freely. From time to time, he sighed as if the weight of all that destruction was too much to bear. The twins watched her motionless, confused by this unprecedented reaction. Diego was the first to move. He approached slowly and with an uncertain voice asked why she was crying. Carmen looked at him with moist eyes, explaining that she was sad to see how much pain they must be in inside to need to break everything around them. Alejandro, who until then had remained motionless near the bookcase, also approached and began to pick up the scattered books. He didn't say anything, but his gesture spoke more than 1,000 words. Carmen continued her strategy by telling the children that when she was little, she too felt like breaking everything when she was very angry or sad. He explained that he completely understood that feeling, because when you have a deep pain inside, it seems like the only way to get it out is to destroy everything around you. The twins listened to her with an attention that no previous nanny had been able to obtain. Carmen spoke their language, not that of the adults who judged them, but that of someone who recognized and validated their feelings. Then Carmen made the decisive move. She took out of her bag a kit for building a cardboard airplane that she had bought with her last euros. He proposed building not one, but 2 planes, one for Diego and one for Alejandro, each decorated according to his own tastes. For the first time in years, the twins found themselves working on the same project without fighting. Diego wanted to paint his plane red and blue, with lightning bolts on the sides. Alejandro preferred a more sober design with gold stars on a black background. Carmen helped them make both versions, showing unexpected artistic talent. While they worked, Carmen began to tell stories of her childhood in Seville. She talked about how she and her siblings invented games with things they found on the street, how they built spaceships out of cardboard boxes. The twins were fascinated by these stories of creativity born out of necessity. Michael, who was watching from the doorway of the studio, couldn't believe what he saw. For the first time in 3 years, he saw his children working together instead of fighting. Carmen had achieved in a few hours what 12 nannies had failed to achieve in 3 years. When it was time for dinner, the twins asked if Carmen could eat with them. At the table, instead of the usual tense silence interrupted by provocations, there was a lively conversation. The twins competed to tell Carmen what they had learned at school, to show her their drawings, to share their little secrets. Carmen listened to them with genuine attention, asked intelligent questions, and made them laugh with spontaneous jokes. Michael realized that he hadn't seen his children so serene since Isabel had died. That night, when it was time to go to sleep, something miraculous happened. The twins asked if they could sleep in the same room, something they hadn't done in 2 years. They wanted Carmen to read them a story. Carmen invented a fable about 2 twin princes who had lost their queen mother and were learning to rule the kingdom together. It was a transparent metaphor for their situation, but told with such sweetness that the children fell asleep peacefully for the first time in months. Michael understood that Carmen was not just any employee. He was someone who had the rare gift of entering people's hearts and healing wounds that seemed incurable. In the following days, Carmen put into practice what she mentally called the heart strategy. He understood that the twins didn't need iron discipline, but rather someone who could recognize and channel their energy constructively. Every morning, she invented new activities that allowed Diego and Alejandro to express their different personalities without conflict. For Diego, she organized treasure hunts around the mansion or races in the garden. For Alejandro, she would prepare puzzles to solve or stories to complete. But Carmen's true genius lay in finding projects that required the skills of both of them. When he proposed building a treehouse, Diego took care of the physical part while Alejandro designed the structure and calculated the measurements. For the first time, they discovered that their differences could be complementary rather than a source of conflict. Carmen had also understood that behind the twins' anger was a deep pain that no one had allowed them to truly express. All the adults had tried to help them get over the loss of their mother, as if grief was something to be ashamed of. Carmen, on the other hand, dedicated half an hour each night to what she called mom time. She would sit with them in the living room and encourage them to recount memories of Isabel, to share how much they missed her, to cry if they felt like it. I didn't try to comfort them with cliches or distract them. I just let them be sad, and this allowed them to begin grieving in a healthy way. Michael watched this transformation with growing amazement. Her children were becoming normal children again. They laughed, played, and sometimes fought, but in a normal way, like all siblings do. But Carmen was also changing Michael. At night, after putting the twins to bed, she would stay and talk with him about how the day had gone. Michael began to confide in him, to tell him how inadequate he felt as a father, how tormented he was by feelings of guilt. Carmen listened to him without judging. He then shared little observations about the twins that helped him understand them better. He explained that Diego needed physical challenges to release energy, and that Alejandro often felt excluded because his intelligence made him seem more mature. He suggested ways to connect with each of them individually. Gradually, Michael began to participate more in the twins' daily lives. Instead of locking himself in the study after dinner, he joined in their activities. He discovered that Diego had inherited his passion for engineering, while Alejandro had a natural talent for finance. One night, while watching a movie together, Diego fell asleep leaning against Michael and Alejandro curled up on his other side. Carmen watched them from the armchair and finally saw what she had hoped to create: a family that was learning to love each other again. But Carmen knew her work wasn't done yet. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. There was one last wound left to heal, the deepest: the feeling of guilt the twins carried inside for their mother's death. Carmen had noticed how the twins carefully avoided talking about the day of the accident. Every time the topic touched on that moment, they became tense and aggressive. He understood that the core of his pain lay there, but he knew he had to proceed with extreme delicacy. The occasion came one Sunday afternoon while they were organizing Mom's memory album that Carmen had suggested they create together. The twins had collaborated enthusiastically, choosing photos, writing short dedications, decorating the pages. But when they got to the last photos, those taken a few days before the accident, they both froze. Carmen saw Diego clench his fists and Alejandro begin to tremble. Instead of changing the subject, he decided it was time to face the truth. He sat between them and, in a sweet but firm voice, said that he felt there was something they had never talked about, something that made them feel guilty. Diego was the first to break down. Through tears, she confessed what she had been keeping inside for 3 years. On the day of the accident, he and Alejandro had had a terrible fight over a toy. Mom had had to intervene to separate them, and that's why she had left home later than usual. If they hadn't fought, Diego thought, Mom wouldn't have been at that intersection at that exact time. Alejandro nodded between his ears, confirming that he had thought the same thing every day for 3 years. They felt responsible for their mother's death, and this conviction had fueled their anger at each other and the world. Carmen took them both in her arms and told them something no one had ever told them: that Mom's death was no one's fault, least of all theirs. He explained that accidents happen due to a combination of factors that no one can predict or control. The fight between them had been normal, as it is normal for children to fight. But above all, Carmen told them something that had a profound impact on them: that Mom, wherever she was, would never want to see them suffer or stop loving each other because of something that wasn't their responsibility, that a mother's love is stronger than death. Michael, who had heard everything from the study door, joined them. For the first time in 3 years, he spoke to his children about their mother with serenity instead of pain. She told how Isabel loved them more than anything else in the world, how proud she was of both of them, how she had always said they were her greatest blessing. That night the twins cried together all the pain they had kept bottled up for 3 years. They cried for their missing mother, for the lost time, for hating each other, for all the beautiful moments they could have had together. But finally they also cried with relief, freeing themselves from that terrible weight. Carmen held them until they fell asleep, exhausted, but finally at peace. Michael looked at her with infinite gratitude. That woman had done what years of therapy had failed to do. He had given his children permission to forgive each other and love each other again. From that night on, the twins changed completely. They were no longer two angry, lonely children, but two brothers who had rediscovered the pleasure of being together. 6 months after Carmen's arrival, the Mendoza mansion was completely transformed. It was no longer a battlefield, but a house full of life, laughter, and shared projects. The twins had become normal children again. They played together, studied hard, and had made new friends at school. Michael had discovered that he was a better father than he thought. Following Carmen's advice, I had learned to dedicate individual time to each child, recognizing and appreciating their different personalities. With Diego, I went to the stadium and they built models. With Alejandro, I visited museums and played chess. But above all, I had learned to be emotionally present. Carmen had become much more than an employee. She was the person who held that family together, the one who always knew what to say in difficult times, the one who filled the house with human warmth. Michael had realized that he depended on her opinions not only for the children, but also for important decisions in his life. One night, after putting the twins to bed, Michael and Carmen found themselves sitting in the garden talking, as they did every night. Michael confessed something he had kept inside for months. He was falling in love with her. Carmen remained silent for a long time. She then explained that she also had feelings for him, but she was afraid. I came from a completely different world. I hadn't studied. He didn't know how to behave in his social environments. Michael was an important, wealthy man, accustomed to a certain type of life. Michael looked at her tenderly and told her that in 8 months Carmen had proven to be smarter, wiser, and stronger than anyone he had ever met, that her academic qualifications or social background mattered nothing compared to what she had done for her family. Their first kiss came naturally, sweet and full of promise. It was the beginning of a love story born of daily sharing, of mutual respect, of the common construction of something beautiful. The twins accepted the evolution of the relationship between Dad and Carmen with genuine joy. They had already begun to consider her a second mother, the one who had helped them reconnect and find serenity. The wedding was a simple but moving ceremony. Carmen wore a white dress that Michael had custom-made for her, and her hair was decorated with flowers the twins had picked in the garden. During the ceremony, Diego and Alejandro carried the rings, proud to be an active part of that moment. In his acceptance speech, Michael said that Carmen had not only saved his children, but she had also saved him. He had taught her that true love is not the kind that tries to change people, but the kind that helps them become the best version of themselves. Carmen thanked that family for giving her something she'd never had before, the opportunity to love and be loved unconditionally. She had started out as a simple employee looking for work and had ended up finding her true home. On the night of the wedding, while the twins slept in their room, Michael and Carmen sat in the living room where it all began. They looked at the photos in Isabel's memory album, and Michael whispered that he was sure that she, wherever she was happy to see the family united and serene again. 2 years after their wedding, the Mendoza-Ruiz family had become an example to all who knew them. The twins, now 10 years old, had grown up to be well-adjusted and happy children. Diego had channeled his energy into soccer and music, while Alejandro excelled in his studies and had developed a passion for astronomy. But above all, they had become best friends again. Michael had discovered that being a present husband and father gave him more satisfaction than any work success. He had delegated part of the management of the company in order to be able to dedicate more time to his family. Carmen had changed him profoundly, teaching him that true wealth is not measured in money, but in authentic relationships. Carmen had blossomed in that new life. Michael had encouraged her to return to her studies, and she had earned a diploma in child psychology by studying at night. He had also begun collaborating with a support center for families in need, sharing his experience with the twins. The biggest surprise came one spring morning when Carmen announced she was pregnant. Michael and the twins exploded with joy. The idea of having a little brother or sister excited Diego and Alejandro, who immediately offered to help with the baby. During the pregnancy, Carmen continued to care for the twins with the same dedication, but now Michael had become a true partner in managing the house and the children. The roles had been distributed naturally, creating a perfect balance. Little Emma was born on a sunny September day. She was beautiful, with Carmen's dark hair and the Mendoza family's blue eyes. The twins were the first to meet her, and their love for their little sister was immediate and total. Michael watched Carmen breastfeed Emma, while Diego and Alejandro made gestures to make her smile and realized how lucky he had been. That woman had arrived as an employee and had transformed him into the richest man in the world, not in money, but in love, serenity, and true happiness. Carmen confessed to Michael that sometimes she couldn't believe that this was really her life. As a child in Seville, she dreamed of a serene family, but she had never dared to imagine something so beautiful. Michael told him that the credit was all his. She had taken a broken family and rebuilt it with patience, wisdom, and infinite love. He had proven that you don't need titles or riches to be extraordinary. All it takes is a big heart and the will to put it at the service of others. The twins had become exemplary older brothers. They helped with Emma, protected her, taught her everything they knew. They had understood that love is not divided, it is multiplied. Michael had also begun to dedicate part of his wealth to helping other families in difficulty, inspired by Carmen's example. Together, they had created a foundation that offered support to single parents and children who had suffered trauma. On the night of Emma's first birthday, while the whole family was gathered in the garden for the party, Michael raised his glass for a toast. He said that 4 years ago, he thought his life was over with Isabel. His children were uncontrollable. He felt like a failure as a father. The house was a battlefield. Then Carmen arrived, who with her silent wisdom had healed wounds that seemed incurable. I hadn't tried to replace Isabel or erase the pain. He had simply taught them all that it is possible to honor those who are no longer here by continuing to love those who are still here. Emma slept peacefully in Carmen's arms, surrounded by a family that loved her unconditionally. The twins played in the garden, serene as all children should be. Michael watched that scene knowing that Isabel, from wherever she was, smiled seeing how much love had grown around the children she had loved so much. That night, while Carmen checked that all the children were sleeping well, Michael stayed in the garden looking at the stars. He thought that sometimes life takes something precious away from you, but if you have the courage to stay open to love, it can also give you much more than you would have ever dared to hope for. Carmen caught up with him and sat down next to him. Together they looked at the illuminated house where their 3 children were sleeping. And without needing words, they both knew they had created something magical, a family born not of blood, but of the daily choice to love, support, and grow together. Because in the end, true love is one that doesn't seek to erase the past, but rather builds a future where even pain becomes the seed of new happiness. Like if you believe that love can heal any wound. Comment on which moment in history touched you the most. Share to inspire those who believe in the power of second chances. Subscribe for more stories of family rebuilding with love. Sometimes it takes a wise heart to teach a family how to love each other again. Sometimes the simplest people have the most profound solutions. And sometimes the greatest love is born when you least expect it, in the most authentic ways. Because the true richness of a family is not measured in money, but in hugs, laughter, and hearts that beat together. Yeah,